Welcome to Simply by DealHQ. On this podcast, we engage thought leaders on topical issues around law and business in the most simplistic manner.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of season 2 of Simply by DealHQ. My name is Eme Chioma, and I'm an associate of DealHQ Partners, and I will be your host for this podcast. On this episode, our focus will be on patents, and we will be talking about unlocking Africa's genius, democratizing patents for innovation and R&D growth. Today, we are joined by our very own lead advisor, Mrs. Tosin Ajose. Mrs. Ajose has a track record for being a formidable advisor whose commercial acumen is acknowledged within the legal community. She's a consummate administrator and business leader. She leads a dynamic law practice that is driven by technology and innovation, which in about 7 years has become a reference point for boutique commercial law firms in Africa and in other jurisdictions outside Africa. Welcome, Mrs. Tosin Ajose, to our podcast today.
Good morning, Chioma. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, ma'am. On the panel, we also have with us one of our associates, Ms. Precious Ossi, a member of the Technovation and Intellectual Property Practice team of DealHQ Partners. Precious plays a very key role in structuring and protecting intellectual property portfolios for innovative companies. Her practice is defined by technical excellence, commercial insights, and a deep understanding of the legal and regulatory landscape.
Good morning, Chioma. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Precious. We are truly excited to have you with us on this episode of Simply. And I know our listeners are eager to hear your insights on how Africa can shift from being a consumer of foreign technologies to becoming a producer and global competitor, and how making the patent system more inclusive can be the game changer for innovation across sectors from healthcare to agriculture and to technology. So without wasting any more time, please permit me to jump to our very first question. And I will be throwing this question to Tosin. So Tosin, in advanced markets, patents aren't just a piece of paper. A patent can generate licensing income, be sold, or even serve as collateral for financing. Today, Fortune 500 companies literally build empires around patent portfolios. In Africa, though, patents are still not seen as assets that can sit proudly on a balance sheet. Why do you think patents remain underutilized on the continent? And what mindset shift is needed for corporates, investors, and even policymakers to start treating them as a strategic asset?
Wow, thank you. I'm so excited that we're having this conversation now rather than later. I think that just merely, observing the trend across the African market shows that there's a lot of uplift in conversations around innovation, research and development, which is very exciting. I think that in itself has potential to unlock the opportunities and the potentials in the patent market. But before I respond to your question, I'm just going to give, a little bit of background. And, one of the things that I think is important for the audience to know is that there is data to show that globally, amongst all the key asset classes that are recognized in the financial market, patents happen to have a pride of place as the number 4 asset in terms of viability, and fourth only after recognition of cash, equities, and real estate. This is very significant, and it's important for us to take note of that. Also, I think it's important to know that all the big Fortune 500 companies and many of the major ultra wealthy individuals and ultra high net worth individuals across the world have a level of exposure to this asset class. It's very telling how important and how viable it is, because anything that gives you access to explore innovation exclusively also has significant potential to give you a first right of place in the market. And that's why you will see that a lot of the patent applications that we have globally come from governments, institutions and agencies, from technology companies, from life science companies, from big pharma, engineering firms, and manufacturing firms. And then, of course, we have the ones that come from the academia, which primarily, is the host of research and development globally. Now, why is Africa still, at the far end of the food chain when it comes to patent registration and perhaps even other kinds of IP asset protection and registration? I think number one reason is that there is not enough awareness and understanding for how essential it is for us to protect our intellectual property rights. As a matter of fact, we don't even identify with them as an asset. Many people that bother to register intellectual property related assets is probably because they work within the confinement of an institution that has, an understanding of how this can, impact your balance sheet. But generally, if you were to line up, multiple, people from across the continent and ask questions around their understanding of, intellectual property rights and even the processes for registration, you'll find that there is a depth of knowledge and understanding. So that's where it starts from. How much do people know about this? How much understanding is there about the value of, some of these assets and how essential it is to protect these rights? I think the other thing is about the legal and the regulatory framework and how much, the government is doing to make it easy for people to even go through registration processes. And then the other thing is, we have a formal system that organizes people that work in research and development, that also provides, funding, for innovation and for research and development. R&D is expensive. So how much have we formalized the structure for financing, innovation in Africa to the point where it's important for people to even register, these assets? And then within the corporate landscape, how many investors are asking questions around the companies where they invest in and whether they actually own their intellectual property rights and whether those rights are protected? At the epicenter of your existence as a corporate is the intellectual property rights that give you or enable you to do your work, to do your business, and to operate. So if you're in manufacturing, for instance, do you have the rights over your products? Do you have the rights over your recipes and, your production processes and all of that? Or can it be contended with you by a third party? Do you have the assurance that you own those processes? Or if it is put to test, would it turn out that somebody else or another entity, has this right? We need to begin to understand that IP rights sit as one of the biggest risks to your operations as a corporate. And it's not just sound bites, because a lot of people would assume that it's sound bites. I cannot count how many times as a commercial lawyer we have tried to do transactions in mergers and acquisitions in local companies within the African landscape, and where the companies did well in all the other categories of our due diligence, they fell flat when it came to the DD that was done in terms of their intellectual property rights. So it's so important that such conversations as we're having now, is mainstreamed and people begin to understand that it's much more than a fancy thing that you do to just tick the box. The existence of your business, the existence of your operation sits smack at the center of how much or how well you have protected some of your intellectual property rights. I think I need not go further. We need to just continue to have these conversations and see how we can continue to reinforce the importance of Africa waking up and rising up to the occasion and beginning to drive conversations that would enable recognition of innovation rights, registration of innovation rights, funding of research and development and innovation, funding of the process of even registration and protection, and then understanding how to exploit and get value from these assets. Because if you don't understand how to exploit the assets, then it's likely that you will not even recognize or identify it as an asset in the first instance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tosin, for that answer. So this leads me to my second question, and I'll be throwing this question to Precious. The numbers tell a very sobering story, just like Tosin has mentioned. Africa accounts for just less than 1% of global patent filings, compared to Asia's 66%, North America's 19%, and Europe's 11%. Even within Africa, the bulk of filings come from South Africa and a few other countries. So when you look at these figures, what do you really say about Africa's innovative economy? And are there particular data points that alarm you, or perhaps inspire hope about where the continent stands today?
So thank you very much for that question. If we want to be very honest with ourselves and we hear 1%, less than 1%, 0.5%, whatever it is, we would want to think that we are way behind. What have we been doing all this while when we are hearing 66%, 19% for some other countries? But I think that I would like to look at it from a more positive outlook. I think that conclusion about us being way behind might be wrong. Right? So what I think that the numbers actually show is that Africa presents an untapped economy. So we are faced now with something that can still be explored. We can still sit back to identify and pick out the rudiments of how do we come to now explore this thing that we have. Okay, it's still fresh, it's still open, and it's still able to be turned into something that is even greater, because Africans innovate. So the problem now is not the innovation. The problem is not that we don't have what to protect, we don't have intellectual property. I think that Africans are very intellectual people. We innovate every single day, from fintechs, renewable energy, agrotech. We see different things everywhere in so many parts of Africa. But the problem now is that this idea that we have, what system do we have that can turn these ideas into protected, investable, commercial, valuable assets? That's where I think the problem lies. So we have a system that is still under construction. So when I look at the numbers, what I would easily think rather is that we are creating solutions. I think that is the first problem. We are creating solutions, but we are not looking for ways to claim ownership of these solutions that we are creating. And in the IP world of today, what we must understand is that ownership is everything. You cannot say you have something if you have not registered it. Ownership is everything about a patent, about trademarks and all of that. So it's not just the paperwork, but it is being able to say, I developed this and I have marked it in the books, and I have a stake in the future. I have been able to create a stake in the economic future for myself. Okay, and this is the part of the global economy that now belongs to me because of this thing that I have made. So Africans need to understand that there is potential somewhere that they have left untapped, and then think of how can I get ownership of this potential that I have left untapped. Okay, so, and then also I know that it is not about talent, it's about structure. If it comes to talents, Africans are very talented, but then what structure have we been able to set up to translate these talents that we have into something that is actually useful in the market and can be invested into? Okay, investors would not want to put in their money into just anything. So just because you can create something, it has to be solving a need. What structure do we have? You see places like Asia and other countries that are ranking higher in when we are talking about global patenting. It's not that they have the smartest people. It is just that they have been able to create a structure where the things they are doing are able to translate into actual marketable and investable solutions that can then be translated further into something that can be owned and leveraged upon by the owners. Okay. Then also I think that one worrying problem, or one something that should rather bother us, is that Africa has created a space where it now seems like a host. If we even look at the numbers that we have mentioned, we would see that most of the patents that have been registered in African countries are owned by foreigners, that that then want to bring in their products into the system in Africa. What happened to our products? What are we doing with them? You'd see Africans go outside of Africa to host their own products. Why? I think that is a bigger problem. So we have these untapped markets, and then the people who are supposed to even help it grow, you see them taking their products outside. So that's the mindset shift that we need to have to then bring back what we have. And then for those that do not even know about the rights and all of this, then we start to talk about awareness, and then we start to let people know that there is actual commercial value in this. And then it's not just speaking to the innovators, it's also speaking to the investors, the corporates, the governments, and all these other people that can assist in turning our innovations into value, into valuable assets. So I think that is where we should be looking at. The numbers are we could say it is disappointing, but it allows us to see a market that is untapped, and then we can start to sit to strategize to know how can we further explore what we already have. Okay, so we should be talking about policy making. We should be talking about creating a market that can help scale the innovations of Nigeria. We should be talking of Africa. Sorry, we should be talking about the government and what the governments of the African countries can do. Okay, so I think that this gap presents an opportunity rather than a limitation, and we should be thinking to how can we explore this opportunity.
Speaking on the people, or rather the opportunities that we need, or we have rather to create a viable patent economy. Tosin, I'll be throwing this question to you. So globally, R&D ecosystems thrive because universities, corporates, and governments all play their parts in creating commercial viable IP. Africa spends only about 0.4% of GDP on R&D compared to a global average of 1.8%. From your perspective, who are the most critical players we need to mobilize to change that in Africa? And looking at our own economies, which sectors do you believe are most ripe for an R&D driven patent boom? And how do we better connect these researchers, patent holders, and businesses to bring innovations to the market?
I think that African governments, like I said in my first attempt at answering your question, that we're seeing African governments doing just a tad bit more than was done in earlier years in terms of funding R&D innovation and R&D development. But I think beyond funding, we need to enable, particularly the next generation. I would like to see an Africa where in our curriculum building, right from primary school, we are paying attention to incorporating research and innovation type studies, whether it is through STEM, through simple basic engineering studies, or whatever it is that is age appropriate through the different cadres of education into the system, and that the government is, providing the resources that is required for our children or for the younger generation to even begin to have, a sense that the directions of a country or a government or a people is usually driven by the level of innovation that you see that is coming out of that community. We can already see how much Asia is investing in the next generation as relates to technology and innovation. And it's no surprise that they're getting the kinds of results that they're getting. When you were speaking, you spoke about them owning up to 60 plus of all the patents that exist in the global markets today. So I think we start from, positioning the next generation. The other one is building a viable policy infrastructure that supports research, development, and innovation, right? What are the laws saying? The key industries or the key government agencies that work in places where, innovation is key. So for instance, you have some agencies and departments of the federal government that are still laboring under old laws, old infrastructure. So for instance, let's take our oil and gas sector as an example. What are the processes and systems that we are using? Do they benchmark with today's level of innovation that we see in the market? Let's talk about the agricultural sector. Agri-tech is becoming a major play across the world. What are we doing that is allowing us tap into, and provide support for Africa's nuanced markets? I think it was Precious who was speaking and was saying that we are consumers of innovation. We cannot continue to be a country or a continent that consumes innovation, because many times innovation is tailored to the nuances of the market where the innovation originates from. So sometimes it may not be tailor fit for your market, and then you find that you cannot really optimize it. So for instance, if we're looking at agri solutions in Nigeria, for instance, we'll be working around what are our core staples. How do we ensure that we can have these staples in and out of season? How do we develop seeds? We're still importing seeds. We're still importing fertilizers, which are core components that we use for our agriculture to produce food. We're talking about irrigation technology that we are copying from the West. How do we begin to think and have foresight? One of the things that this particular dispensation in Nigeria is trying to do is to solve the issue of availability of power, through other non-traditional means. And we are talking about things like off-grid solutions, like solar and all the rest of them. The question is, if we are importing technology, does it meet our standard needs or requirements? Are there ways that Africa is, and are there ways that Africa would emerge because the people that are providing the technology for the future understand who we are? We have a lot of dirt around security, and a lot of people have been talking about the level of insecurity in the country. Are we doing a lot around technology and innovation that helps us stem some of the security challenges that we have within the continent? Yeah. Some people are saying that Africa predominantly has to keep its borders very porous because of the kinds of people that we are. We are a very together kind of people. We don't have that culture of building walls around us and keeping the neighbors out. That's not the culture in Africa. But if we're not doing that, what are the other ways that we can use to monitor and control the inflow and outflow of people, or the ingress and egress of people across different nations? These are some of the things that I would expect that we're having conversations about. I think the other point I will make is about simplifying laws, regulations, and processes, and having clarity around the process of registration. So I know that in Africa today, there are 3 pathways for patent registration. You have the national registration, which you would do in the country of origin. You also have the ARIPO pathway, where you can register, make one registration in any of the ARIPO countries, and it gives you a pathway to also register within any of the other countries that fall within ARIPO. And then we have the OAPI, which is the registration process for the Francophone countries, that has a simple centralized registration desk where you can register in one country and then get recognition for your patents across multiple jurisdictions. So the question is, how do we ensure that now that we are even beginning to implement the Africa Free Trade Agreement, that there's now a consolidated way that you can recognize patent assets across Africa, that is simplified, that is cost efficient. I can register in Nigeria, and just by virtue of registering in Nigeria, and my rights and assets are also recognized across other African countries. That will be a very significant uplift. I think finally I would say that I'm expecting to see a good handshake between governments, like you've mentioned, private sector and the academia, in a way that not only speaks to R&D and innovation, but also speaks to people beginning to recognize that you can endow the universities to do research for corporates in the areas where the corporates are looking to do major innovation. So for instance, if I'm a company that works in agriculture, I'm probably looking for a way to ensure that we have multi-season crops, maybe for some of our staples, perhaps rice. I mean, how do we have rice that maybe from the point where it is being planted, it doesn't need major irrigation? right? And you can cut the cost of production significantly by ensuring that maybe it's the kind of rice species that needs very low water consumption or something along those lines. I mean, if for instance I'm a manufacturer of rice, as we do know that we now have a lot of local manufacturers in Nigeria, for instance, and we are looking for a species of rice that will be suitable for this purpose, and we imagine the cost savings that will be achieved if we're able to do this. How about endowing a few universities, their agricultural departments or institutions, and giving them or putting them to task to come up with, focus on these kinds of research and innovation over the next couple of years, and fund it with some understanding that whatever patent right comes out of that process will be co-owned between the private entity and the university. How about us having innovation hubs or research and innovation hubs that are funded by the federal government and absorb some of these young talents that we have that are very focused on looking for some of the solutions to the key problems that we have in Nigeria? How can we begin to, build those ecosystems that are supported by government institutions, and even private sector? The final thing is, how do we also support that we have foreign investments into these ecosystems after we've been able to build, core structures that enable this to happen? How do you ensure that global capital can not only be pursuing corporates as FDI or portfolio investment, but that are even funding from the level of research and innovation, and that this research and innovation is proprietary to Africa to solve some of the African problems that we have? That handshake for me between all these core players, I think, is what will begin to help us see the uplift that we want. The final thing I want to talk about is systemic institutional barriers. There's too much competition between the different countries in Africa, and I think we need to break down some of these barriers and begin to collaborate across the continent. One single central system for promoting R&D, one single central system for registration of IP rights, recognition of rights, will begin to get us, far ahead from where we are. And then we also have a culture of open access in Africa. I think we need to also start thinking about laws around how much time we will give for exploitation of these rights, particularly in core areas such as agriculture, big pharma, big technology, and life science, because these are some of the problems that we are already seeing in some of the much developed markets. We need to start thinking about how some of those will be addressed, as we begin to, promote significant uplifts in this market. I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tosin, for that answer. Now, I'll be moving right to Precious, because something Tosin said about being able to register your patents in Nigeria and it being recognized across the other African countries. Now, imagine a teenage girl in Kano being able to file her patents online in Hausa, or a Ghanaian lab protecting its breakthrough malaria drug before it is copied abroad. So for many Africans, the patent system feels very distant, expensive, and overly complex. If you were tasked with redesigning the system from scratch, what reforms would you prioritize to make patents accessible and inclusive? And if you could recommend just one bold catalytic move right now to democratize patents across Africa, what would it be, and who needs to make it happen?
Thank you very much, Chioma, for that question. So I like the image that you have just painted. A teenage girl in Kano filing her patent in Hausa, or a Ghanaian research lab protecting its malaria breakthrough drug. Now, I think that is exactly the future of intellectual property in Africa that we are looking for. Inclusive, digital, and empowering, accessible to everybody. But on the other hand, you are right. Actually, for most Africans today, patent seems very, very distant, seems expensive and inaccessible. So if I was tasked with redesigning it from scratch, I think that there are 5 key reforms that I would try to bring up into the system. Now, the first is digital and multilingual access. So I think radical digitalization is a very key step that should be taken. Every inventor should be able to file, track, and manage their applications entirely online or in their preferred language or wherever it is. So this means user-friendly e-filing portals, mobile-based access for including the rural innovators, multilingual interfaces. So we should be able to have an IPO portal that you can select the language that you want to speak, because we have people innovating from that have different backgrounds, and then not everybody, of course, speaks English. So it's not just about making a tech upgrade, it's that upgrade should be accessible and should also be inclusive. So a business owner should be able to go anywhere, or rather be anywhere, and protect their intellectual property online. If they are unable to file online, they should also not be left out. IPO, that is intellectual property offices, should be open and accessible and staffed with individuals that are able to help in all the regions that are practicable without the bureaucratic hassle. So that Hausa girl in Kano should be able to walk into an IPO office in Kano without having to send the delegate to Abuja. And then by the time she gets to the IPO office in Kano, they should be able to attend to her and help her out, explain the process to her without having to tell her, oh, we need to transport this document, that document to Abuja, to the headquarters for this, for that. That is what we see happening now. So it should be accessible to everybody, everywhere. And then that leads me to my next point, a simplified and a tiered filing system. So we now need to rethink how complex and costly these applications have become. Many young innovators don't have the money, some of them are not able to come up with a 100-page application to state what their product is, why they need it to be protected, and all of that. So the system needs to evolve. It needs to become a bit less expensive, and then we should be talking about provisional patents for early stage ideas if they are unable to go all through the whole process, so that they don't have to think that it's expensive. At every tier that you find yourself, you should be able to have some sort of protection available for you. So that is my next that is another thing that I will do. And then of course, regional harmonization. So Mrs. Tosin Ajose had mentioned that we have things like the frameworks like the ARIPO and the OAPI that are used in several African countries and Francophone countries, but they are largely underutilized, and also they are not applicable to all African countries. They are only applicable to the member countries, the countries that are signed up to that framework. So what happens to a unified continental IP framework that allows filing and protection across all African countries, similar to the EU patent system that allows filing and protection in all EU countries? So these are things that we should start to consider. So what happens to having a shared digital infrastructure that will then centralize database across countries and then reduce duplication? Of course, we're talking about transparency, and then also the policies would then be developed to make sure that enforcement across these countries is possible as well. That is one area that we should also be looking at. So it's not just about protecting, but enforcement and efficiency across borders. Now, the next thing that I would be doing is thinking about how to build capacity and how to build local IP hubs. So we can't democratize patents without, first of all, democratizing the knowledge that we have about patents. So we should be talking about creating awareness, establishing innovation hubs where people are able to come in and learn. Government should partner with private investors or partners. Universities should be embedded with knowledge. We should have tech startups and hubs. We should have business incubators where innovators and inventors can go and get hands-on support on how to draft their patent filing application, how to file it, how to commercialize it, how to license, and basically how to get returns from this, so that they understand that, okay, if I need to learn more, I can go to so place, right? This is a hub that I can go to get the knowledge. So these kind of places should be established in several regions and should be made accessible to people. So it it will serve like innovation clinic that would offer some sort of services to innovators. They come, they get technical assistance, and especially for young inventors and entrepreneurs that need this kind of knowledge. Okay. And then the fifth key reform that I would be looking to is financial and policy incentives. So make me feel like I can make money from this thing, not just the money that I would get from patenting, but the government could offer me some sort of incentive, some sort of tax incentive for registering a patent locally, maybe in one sector or industry or the other. So financial and policy incentives. Startups should feel secure, should feel like if I protect my IP protection, maybe there is an incentive for this. And then would also see banks and investors will be getting encouraged to want to invest also, so that they can tap into this incentive that has been put in place. And then we'll also see people starting to recognize that intellectual property can be assets, can be valuable, can be collaterals. Okay, so if we can establish a system that understands this, and then also we can create valuation standards for IP, so that when these investors want to come in, they're able to have a standard to value the IP and know what exactly it is worth. If we can create these kind of standards, we can create lending instruments that are IP backed, would see that investors would finally start to see intellectual property, patents as an asset that is worthy of being protected, okay, and not just as let me assist this startup. They would then see it as I could actually invest my money here and gain from it as well. Okay, so these are 5 things that I would think. And then you said if I could recommend one bold move, what would it be? I think that one bold move that I would recommend is creating a single platform that allows investors across continents to file, that has the ability to access multiple African languages, access patent examiners digitally, receive real-time guidance. I mean, this is a platform that allows for all of this under one harmonized African system. And then this will drastically lower costs. It will eliminate the geographic and language barriers that we are facing. And then we see that most people, even in the grassroots, will start to take it more seriously. Thank you, Chioma.
Thank you so much, Precious. So I think one thing I can grasp from all our answers here is that we need a unified continental patent registry, just one system where all African countries can come and register their patents, and it will be automatically recognized across all the 54 African countries. And so we know that the ARIPO and OAPI exist, but their reach is still limited, because there's the Francophone and there's the Anglophone countries. However, with the advent of the AFCFTA, it could possibly unify the process. So I'm going to throw my next question to Tosin. So we know that ARIPO and OAPI exist, like I said, and their reach is limited. But a continental patent registry under the AFCFTA could unify all the processes. It could lower costs, and it could strengthen Africa's bargaining power in global innovation. So if we as Africans were to go down that route, what do you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges, and how transformative could such a system be for Africa's innovative future?
Wow, I can surely see a future where this works. And like I mentioned before, I think one of the things that the AFCFTA gives us an opportunity to do is to actually explore a single innovation market for Africa. What would that look like? It would look like having one application, one fee, one language or multiple languages, or a platform that allows you make application in multiple languages, and then one standard of examination that would apply across Africa. What does that do? This analogy that you had used previously about that young lady in Kano. So a young lady that sits in Kano is able to process an application within the framework of this continental platform, where her application is received and the application allows her to determine what countries within Africa she would like to get protection, because it's also important that the framework is not rigid. So there are some people that have specific markets where they want to protect, their assets or their IP assets or their IP rights, and not necessarily across the 55 countries in Africa. They are able to select, and then this now begins to define and determine, maybe costs, and then the way that the application will be covered. I think that one of the things that this also allows us to do is to consolidate expertise for examination. We don't have to have different rules and systems across multiple countries. We can agree a single framework for examination. So what will then happen is that automatically one application gives you right of protection continent-wide. The only thing you would then need to do is to determine whether you need global protection, which then takes you within the PCT regime, where you can do an application and also, then have, some level of global cover. But more importantly, I think just drawing from what Precious has said, this system must be available, but beyond being available must also be affordable. So in the early stages where we are trying to promote, patent application and then R&D in Africa, is not the time to take it out of the reach of SMEs, startups, and regional innovators. It's important that the price point for registration is within reach, and it's a single cost that will be applicable, irrespective of where you're making that application from and whether you want to have cover, continent wide. The other thing that I think will be important, and I think Precious also mentioned it, is that within the framework of this ecosystem that we are promoting for Africa, that there are simplified processes, because a patent registration is a complex process. Just knowing how to put together the documentation that meets the requirements for examination is not something that a lot of people are able to do without some level of support from patent lawyers and other kinds of people that provide, advice on how to go, and also to even just do a readiness assessment, because sometimes you think you have something that will qualify, but you probably do not. Perhaps there is no originality, or there is no way that you can prove that, that innovation does not already exist or is not owned by someone else. Just even helping people do that readiness assessment and having it within a structured framework that doesn't make them break bank is also extremely important. A lot of countries don't have retained capacity to do patent examination. As we know, it's innovation. It's always speaking to something that didn't, exist previously. It's usually maybe sciences, technology, and all the rest of them. We need to have enough competent people that understand the pathways of innovation, the pathways of, product development, and all of these things, because it can be very agnostic. I mean, we've talked about pharmaceutical, life sciences, agriculture, and all of the different dimensions that this innovation can be coming from. But centralizing our expertise within one single framework will do a lot of good for Africa. I also imagine that, we would begin to get sufficient and significant international support for us to make this happen. A lot of the things that we see is a lot of advocacy that is happening on the global stage, and then from the global stage cascading down into the continent. I think we need to now start thinking from inwards out, where we protect our own locally, and then we support our own to even now get protection on the global stage, as opposed to WIPO consistently trying to train, African innovators and what have you. Let's take that ownership. Let's take it back home. Provide the support, provide it even at the grassroots level, and begin to, loosen all the things that are, disincentivizing people from beginning to walk this pathway. Honestly, we cannot emphasize enough that we will not begin to see the kind of growth spots that we want to see in Africa until we resolve this issue of promoting innovation and then promoting, the protection of innovation. So this is where I see Africa going, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing that the AFCFTA Secretariat is pushing an IP agenda like has never happened before. The major challenge I see is a dearth of collaboration across countries. And I hope that we don't see this, as we begin to navigate, the future. I hope that we have more countries that see the bigger good for the continent beyond wanting to stay dominant and in control of, this process within their own jurisdiction. I also think that a way to, ensure that there is attributed fairness in processes and systems would also be very helpful, right? And that no country becomes more dominant than the other, or that there's any, favored treatment that is given to, any particular country or continent, maybe because that country is, way ahead of the others or has better representation within the system or the ecosystem that is being created. But the only thing I see is that collaboration and Africa-wide solution can only do good, and that we need to begin to pursue and go, in that direction. Thanks, Chioma.
Thank you so much, Tosin. So one of the challenges I have identified from Tosin's response is that there is the high cost of patent registration. So this brings me to the very next question I'm going to ask Precious. So in developed markets, banks, VCs, and even pension funds often co-invest in research institutions in exchange for partial patent ownership, thereby creating a pipeline of commercially viable IP while securing long-term returns. So I imagine this is due to the high cost of these registrations. But here in Africa, the model hasn't really taken root. And on top of that, like I earlier mentioned, the filing fees and commercialization costs often discourage these investors. So how can African financial institutions start to see R&D as an investable asset class? And what practical strategies can incentivize private sector players, that's from accelerators to corporates, to fund and protect African innovators' patents?
Chioma, thank you for that question. So yes, like you rightly said, in advanced markets, R&D is not just treated like charity. It is an asset class. Banks, VCs, pension funds, they routinely invest into university laboratories, R&D centers, in exchange for partnership in the patent ownership or some sort of incentives or monetary value that they will be gaining. So that creates a pipeline of commercially viable IP assets. In Africa, however, like you rightly said, we are not there yet, and there are a few reasons to that. So first of all, many financial institutions still have not taken root yet. Some of them still do not know maybe how to value IP, how to measure the risk that is involved in an invention. There is no profiling. There is also the problem of lack of data. We see that investors like the banks and the rest of them are more tilted towards investing in things that they have actual information about. So like land, you see the actual value of land in an area. Machinery, you know the actual value of the machine. So most investors are tilted towards investing into things that they can pin the value to, not intangible assets like intellectual property and things like that. So these are part of the problems that we see. And then also, like we have mentioned, the ecosystem is still fragmented. We see research happening in isolation, and then there is probably no capital to commercialize it. Some set of people somewhere are just doing some small research. They don't have the funding and things like that. So these are problems that we see. How can we solve this? I think that one thing that we can do is build an IP valuation and financing framework. So then this is a step to giving the banks, the investors, the DFIs and the rest of that a tool to pricing innovation. So they're not just coming in and saying, we want to invest in this. They know how they can negotiate. They know how they can price their stake. they know what share in this can we have. There is a value. They have a method of measuring the value. So we need to have policymakers coming together to standardize evaluation system, to create an IP valuation guideline. Okay, it could be a collaboration between banks, financial regulators, intellectual property experts, and other people that are able to come up with a system that can help making IP bankable collateral. So this is the first thing that can be done, so that if we are able to create a system where IP can be valued, once it can be valued, it can be financed, it can be insured, it can be used as security, it can be used as collateral once you can create a valuation around it. So I think that is the first step. That is a foundational step that needs to be taken. Now, another step that we can take is creating maybe an IP investment fund. So African countries could come together to establish maybe a public-private fund, an innovation fund that can maybe allow for co-investments between banks, pension funds, VC firms, R&D enthusiasts, and people like this. They come together to create a fund that would then invest in potential IP products and things like this that have commercial value. Now, this takes us back. How do you know the commercial value? That is because a system for valuation must have already been established. So then this fund would then be used to de-risk early stage innovation, provide some sort of capital, technical support that would allow these innovators to focus on their invention and see how to make it even better. And then the investors can then take part in sharing benefits in the long run and then getting royalties and licensing and other things once that invention hits the market. So that is another thing, an investment fund. And then another thing that can be done is incentivizing private sector participation. So we should not only be talking about the government and academia, we should also be thinking about how can the private investors also benefit from this. These are the heavier investors. If we start to look at it, the private investors provide more money to things like this. So how can they benefit? How can they see the benefits that they can gain from this? We could introduce tax incentives, like I had mentioned before, co-financing schemes that would reward private sector players, from accelerators to corporate bodies and others in the private sector, so that they can start to think about how to fund patentable research. They are looking for returns, right? So how can these returns be optimized? That is something that we should also be looking into. Another thing that we could look into is fostering collaboration. So like Mrs. Ajose had said, schools can be funded to carry on some sort of innovative research to develop one thing or the other. So if one school or one university is incapable of doing this, what happens to creating a system where different universities and other establishments that have interest in a particular in a particular innovation come together to collaborate and then create these inventions? And then we can now start to think of things like co-ownership, technology transfer, frameworks and things like that, so that the partners are all able to negotiate fair sharing arrangements, and then they are able to discover more ways that they could make the collaboration work for all parties involved. And then one last thing that I would recommend is leveraging on accelerators, co-incubators, and all these hubs that we have. So venture capital studios, they play a very serious role in helping startups. Now, we could have more of these kind of more of these accelerators and incubators in place that would then focus more on patents and helping startups patent their innovations early, link them to investors, link them to these collaborative research institutes that are able to help in the research process, So these accelerators would then serve as a middleman between the investors and the between the innovators and the investors. Okay, so that is something that we should also be looking at. So I think that a system that enables both the government and the private investors, and then also a system that allows for IP valuation and IP funding, co-ownership of IP models, is one that would help better. Like I said before, we should be able to move from a point of just protecting to understanding that there are actually financial gains in this. There is economic value. So if we are able to create a system that pushes out that knowledge that there is value in this, that's the first bold move that should be made.
Thank you so much, Precious. So it has been a very insightful conversation between Tosin and Precious, and we will be wrapping up with this one question that I would like our both speakers to speak to, and it's on patent pooling. So I would want Tosin to take the first response. So this is the question. Patent pooling. This is where multiple parties combine their IP for joint licensing, and it has helped scale global innovations in sectors like renewable energy and healthcare. So do you think Africa can realistically leverage patent pooling to scale its own innovations globally? And considering that many inventors often choose to warehouse their IP abroad rather than at home, what would it take to build an ecosystem that convince African innovators to register and commercialize their patents right here in Africa?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. And just to set the ball rolling on the question, I think that a lot of it we have already said. This is a concept that is not strange or unusual, in the market. As a matter of fact, it is lending credence to the need to have this handshake between governments, the private sector, or the deployers of capital or capital aggregators as they were, and the innovation community, right? An innovation community could be the academia, and it could be, other private sector entities that are driving, new body of knowledge in any particular area with the sole purpose of solving a problem that exists in the market. Many times the people that have the intention to innovate and create solutions to problems may not necessarily be the ones that will drive the financing. So it's not unusual in other markets globally to see VCs, private equity firms, even family offices, both multifamily and single family offices, taking position at early stage of innovation or research and development. Many times also you see government agencies also taking position. I'd said before that many times the ones that benefit majorly from that solution are the ones that would typically want to open their pockets to fund this process. So for me, one of the biggest gains is that you have a pain point and somebody is willing to put some time, some effort, and some resources behind trailing this problem and trying to find solution. The first gain to financiers is the fact that they benefit from the upside of this problem being solved, eradicated, or minimized. That's the first gain. The second gain is then, exclusive right to exploit, which is the biggest benefit for anyone that is able to register a patent. You are able to exploit that right exclusively for a period. And during that period, what it then means is that you are able to create either a service or a product that you can exploit economically. The other thing is, if it's a problem that has a significant magnitude, take for instance, perhaps you're looking for the cure to COVID-19. That's a global problem. So if some pharmaceutical company in Nigeria, for instance, is able to come up with some cure to COVID, for instance, or a vaccine that even, has more potent power than anything that has ever been, manufactured or created before, that maybe prevents, for instance, HIV or something, what it automatically means is beyond the right to exploit, you're also able to license other people to manufacture products using your exclusive, invention to do that. And there's, potential earning capacity, even if it were in technology. Maybe you innovated a product that is able to maybe uplift people from wherever they are to the moon in 10 seconds, without them. Maybe some capsule that, is able to uplift people to the moon in 10 seconds from wherever else they might be in the world, and that's not something that has existed before. Just taking for instance, there's a lot of costing that will even come. So getting that solution is one thing, turning that solution to a product or a service is another thing, and these are extremely capital intensive processes that would require much more than a single pocket to be able to actualize. So how do we ensure that capital aggregators begin to look to commit funding to innovation in Africa? Because the first thing is, at the point where you're starting, you don't know whether there's going to be success. So it's as simple as putting VC money behind a startup, and you have no assurance that thing is going to see the light of day. But that the potential and the value that you will get if it's a success is huge and massive. This is why people would typically invest in R&D and innovation, because of the potential that will come from success. And people that usually invest in early stage innovation or technology know that they are taking a chance of success. If you invest in 10, perhaps 9 may not see the light of day. Even sometimes you get patents registered and you're not able to commercialize them. That's also something that happens, and it's very, people in this sector already understand that, it's not every valuable invention that ends up having the capacity to be commercialized. And it's important that people also understand that. So this takes me to one point that I think Precious has also mentioned, which is around, valuation and the illiquidity of patents. It's important for us to understand that there is a second level of commercialization, which now, moves from an idea that doesn't exist, a solution that works, to a solution that people will pay for, and pay for at such a scale that, makes it bankable to even say that you're going to commercialization. Sometimes it's a solution that works, but there's no market for it, and so it's not commercially viable, and you may not find people that want to make that investment. But the most important component of it is that it's not something that converts to money overnight. So Africa needs to start thinking about how to make that asset class a bit more fungible than it is. In other climes and other jurisdictions, you have governments actually subsidizing, the first level of innovation. Once you're able to get from innovation to the point where you have a market-ready solution, the second thing is to now get the funding that allows you commercialize it, right? At that point where you are attempting to commercialize it, it's still illiquid until it becomes a product that market is ready to pay for. So the wait time is usually long. And we must begin to incentivize private sector to actually put their money behind it, because it's not as though you're going to, make revenue from it in such a short time. The gestation period is often, very long, and it's capital intensive. So it's very important that we acknowledge that, and that there's a lot of, awareness and knowledge around this. Also, when it becomes a commercially viable service or product, how do we ensure that it can be liquid? I heard Precious talking about patent-backed securities. That's possible. It's possible to begin to, even create value out of future cash flows, out of, and then also bringing in other people, investors, into maybe a special purpose vehicle that owns, a patent that is about to be commercialized, and then you are able to find, some kind of value. So conversations around being able to make the asset class a bit more fungible and give comfort to investors is important. She also mentioned around valuation, which is one of the critical, most defining issues around patents, because it can be very subjective. The value of a patent is determined by the problem is solved and who has that problem and who benefits from that problem being solved. If I'm not within the category of people that benefit from that solution, I may not feel like, it has value. So sometimes it's also about selling to the right, audience. I had said that the best people to fund, any innovation or innovative idea are people that will directly benefit from that problem being solved because it's a pain point that they have. So we need to start thinking along these pathways as we, begin to educate people, because these are challenges that are not going away. In parts of the world where patents are even, a bit more developed, these challenges, still exist and need to be taken care of. Another thing that I think we need to talk about is judicial readiness. One of the things that makes people keep away from investing in patents in Africa is because of the sheer ease with which people can challenge, your ownership and that right, within the twinkle of an eye move to them. It speaks to the quality of examination in the first instance. If I can get a patent right and someone can challenge it, and within 2 years, I no longer have that right. Meanwhile, I have a string of investors that have helped me get from this point of readiness to the point where it becomes a commercially viable product. Imagine what that does to the entire ecosystem. So we need to pay a lot more attention to examination and the requirement for us to even get those rights in the first place, and then preserving the right and ensuring that our judicial system is not frivolous with canceling people's rights and then maybe granting to somebody. There must be some assurance that after we've done all of this and we've scaled, being able to get these rights, that these rights can be preserved and protected and they're not easily, manipulated within our very fragile judicial system.
All right, thank you so much, Tosin. So I would like Precious to just shed some light on the answer.
Like Mrs. Ajose had already mentioned, some things that could be done to keep IP home, to make Africans come back home. I think your question asked them, what do we think can be done to warehouse IP home rather than abroad? So if these things can be put in place, and then including other solutions such as the creating a pathway for diaspora and foreign investor engagement, where we're able to show global buyers and the global markets why African registered patents can now be enforceable and attractive. This is another way to keep our IP protection home rather than allowing investors take their innovations out of the country. And then there are so many other things to do. And then you also asked the question about patent pooling, and you said, do we think it is possible to be done in Africa? Yeah. Right? Okay. So yes, I think absolutely that is very possible, and it can definitely succeed in Nigeria, where we are able to create a system that allows for multiple patent holders to identify themselves and know that, okay, our innovation can solve a common problem. So the essence of patent pooling is different innovators coming together to create a more powerful lever or something like that. We have people combining their IP for joint licensing and upscaling, right? So if we're able to create a system that allows multiple holders identify themselves, so maybe some sort of registry or something that allows everybody to see the patents that they own and identify other people who own similar or patents in the same kind of area that can be complementary in its purpose. That is one way to allow for a successful patent pool. And then also clear licensing terms, where the parties are able to clearly negotiate their terms of ownership in this sort of partnership. And then credible governance for the pool management and distribution of revenue. This is another thing that must be put in place if we want to start considering patent pooling. So I know that patent pooling could be very beneficial, because what one patent holder is able to achieve, 10 patent holders with common purpose might achieve even more. Okay, so this is something that we could start to think about. And then small business owners, entrepreneurs that are still trying to come up, if it becomes a hassle owning and monitoring their IP individually, they could actually consider patent pooling as long as they're able to identify each other and know that, okay, our innovations have a common purpose. They're able to clearly negotiate their terms. This would definitely reduce the cost of the registration, like we've been speaking about, and then it would also make it more accessible because we have different people coming together, pulling their resources. So yes, I think it is very possible in Africa, and I think it should be given more consideration.
Thank you so much, Precious. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Simply by DealHQ. I would like to thank our speakers, Precious and Tosin, for giving us such an enlightening and insightful conversation. And I am sure that even our listeners are very well interested.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is brought to you by DealHQ Partners. To find out more about our services, visit www.dealhqpartners.com. See you on the next episode.